Well, shalom. My name is Todd Bennett, and this is the audio recording of the weekly Shema Israel newsletter titled The Key to Victory. And this was originally sent out on day 12 of month 6 on the Creator's calendar, otherwise known as August 17th, 2024 on the Roman calendar. And in the last message, I talked about finding victory in the battle. And part of that involves understanding the battle and our role in the kingdom of Elohim. It requires a separation from the world and a divorce from our relationship with the nations. We must turn to Yahweh with all our hearts and align with Him and His kingdom. We then fight when, where, and how He instructs. Now remember when Israel wanted to enter into the land after they believed the bad report? Yahweh plagued those who gave the bad report and told the people who believed the report that they would die in the wilderness. They eventually realized the gravity of their sin and decided that they would go in despite the fact that Yahweh said no. Here's the account from Numbers, known as Bamidbar. When Moses told these words to all the people of Israel, the people mourned greatly. And they rose early in the morning and they went up to the heights of the hill country, saying, "Here we are. We will go up to the place that Yahweh has promised, for we have sinned." But Moses said, "Why now are you transgressing the commandment of Yahweh when that will not succeed? Do not go up, for Yahweh is not among you, lest you be struck down before your enemies. For there the Amalekites and the Canaanites are facing you, and you shall fall by the sword. Because you've turned back from following Yahweh, Yahweh will not be with you." But they presumed to go up to the heights of the hill country, although neither the Ark of the Covenant of Yahweh nor Moses departed out of the camp. They thought just because they were Israel that they could win the battle. Well, then the Amalekites and the Canaanites who lived in that hill country came down and defeated them and pursued them even to Hormah. Israel lost because Yahweh was not with them, and this is a critical requirement for the covenant people. It didn't matter that they called themselves Israel. It didn't matter that they wanted to take the land that they believed was promised to them. They were disobedient, and they wanted to claim the promises despite the fact that they were being punished. Another generation would go in at another time. It would be according to Yahweh's timing, not theirs. Well, people who understand the scriptures should take note of this. Sadly, many people have been deceived by Zionism. The deception is so pervasive that even Torah-observant followers of Yeshua are under the spell. And I often refer to Christian Zionists, but there are also many Messianic Zionists. They failed to heed the warning of the Prince of the Army of Yahweh, and every effort of man is doomed if they act presumptively or presumptuously outside of the timing of Elohim. Yahweh said they would wait a generation, and that's exactly what they did. When Israel finally entered the promised land, they needed to participate. But it was really Yahweh who fought the battles. He made the hearts of nations melt with fear. He sapped their strength and even drove many of them out ahead of time. Here are some promises. In Exodus 23:30, he says, "Little by little I will drive them out from before you until you have increased and you inherit the land." In another case, he says, I will send my angel, my messenger, before you, and I will drive out the Canaanite and the Amorite and the Hittite and the Perizzite and the Hivite and the Jebusite. Even when they did have to fight, one man would chase 1,000, according to Deuteronomy 32:30 and Joshua 23:10. It would be abundantly obvious that Yahweh was fighting for them when the priests carried the ark into battle. The Israelites under the leadership of Yahushua, and Joshua is his English name, and sometimes I use Joshua just so you know I'm talking about the patriarch, but it's the same name as Yeshua, the Messiah, and that's important to understand. If you're going to give him an English name, like some people claim, they're saying Jesus and that's his English name. Well, no, that's not his English name. If you're going to give him an English name, it would be Joshua. Under the leadership of Joshua, Israel didn't have to get involved in long sieges. Yahweh simply made the walls fall down. For instance, when Joshua led Israel to take Jericho, He met the prince of the army of Yahuwah, as we discussed last week. He understood that the priority of the prince was not these people called Israel, but rather fighting the battle for Yahuwah. Joshua was given meticulous instructions for the battle, and he had to follow orders if he wanted Israel to participate in that victory. And here's what we hear as far as the orders go. Now Jericho was shut up inside and outside because of the people of Israel. None went out and none came in. And Yahuwah said to Joshua, See, I have given Jericho into your hand, with its king and mighty men of valor. You shall march around the city, all the men of war going around the city once. Thus shall you do for 6 days. 7 priests shall bear 7 Yovelim shofarot. And in English that would be Jubilee shofars, before the ark. On the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priest shall blow the shofars. And when they make a long blast with the Yovel horn, when you hear the sound of the shofar, then all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people shall go up, everyone straight before him. So Joshua the son of Nun called the priests and said to them, Take up the ark of the covenant, and let 7 priests bear 7 Yovelim shofarot before the ark of Yahuwah. And he said to the people, Go forward, march around the city, and let the armed men pass on before the ark of Yahuwah. And just as Joshua had commanded, the people of the 7 priests bearing the 7 Yovelim shofarot before Yahuwah went forward, blowing the shofars. That's one instance where I try to go through and I try to modify the English versions. Sometimes I miss. That says trumpet. It should be a shofar, the shofar. With the ark of the covenant of Yahuwah following them. The armed men were walking before the priests who were blowing the shofars, and the rear guard was walking after the ark, while the shofars blew continually. But Joshua commanded the people, You shall not shout or make your voice heard, neither shall any word go out of your mouth until the day I tell you to shout. Then you shall shout. So he caused the ark of Yahuwah to circle the city, going about at once. And then they came into the camp and spent the night in the camp. Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of Yahuwah, and the 7 priests bearing the 7 Yovelim shofarot before the ark of Yahuwah walked on. And they blew the shofars continually. And the armed men were walking before them, and the rear guard was walking after the ark of Yahuwah, while the shofars blew continually. And the 2nd day they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. So they did for 6 days. On the 7th day they rose early at the dawning of the day and marched around the city in the same manner 7 times. It was only on that day that they marched around the city 7 times. And at the 7th time, when the priests had blown the shofars, Joshua said to the people, Shout, for Yahuwah has given you the city. And the city and all that is within it shall be devoted to Yahuwah for destruction. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent. But you keep yourselves from the things devoted to destruction, lest when you've devoted them, you take any of the devoted things and make the camp of Israel a thing for destruction and bring trouble upon it. But all silver and gold and every vessel of bronze and iron are holy or set apart to Yahuwah. They shall go into the treasury of Yahuwah. So the people shouted, and the shofars were blown. As soon as the people heard the sound of the shofar, the people shouted a great shout, and the wall fell down flat, so that the people went into the city, every man straight before him, and they captured the city. Then they devoted all in the city to destruction, both the men, women, young and old, oxen, sheep, and donkeys, with the edge of the sword. Well, this must have seemed odd. March in circles, sound shofars, and shout. How does that win a battle against a fortified city? Well, that's the lesson of the story. Yahuwah likes to do the unexpected, and he likes to show that he will fight for his people. All he requires is our unquestioning and diligent obedience. Jericho was the center of moon worship in the land of Canaan. The word Yerech actually means moon. And Yahuwah wanted it all destroyed, except for Rahab and her father's house, since she wasn't married. She would later join with Israel by marrying Salmon and be included in the genealogy of David and Yeshua. Well, the destruction of Jericho, was aimed at removing the false gods from the land. And this is the overriding theme of the purpose of Yisrael, and the repeated mention of the Jubilee shofars points to a future fulfillment by Yeshua the Messiah at a future Jubilee. But that is for another discussion. But I think it's important that you understand that you don't read that in English translations. You just read about trumpets and horns and such, but it doesn't make any mention of the Yovelim Shofarot in an English translation, and that's why it's important to read these passages in the Hebrew and examine the Hebrew text, because there's all sorts of information that we just don't get in our English translations. Now, remember that Abram was chosen after Babel and the creation of the nations, and the nations would divide the people from each other and separate them also from Yahweh. The purpose of the promise of Abram and his seed was to draw the nations back to Yahweh. So, in other words, the selection of Abram was a direct result of the division and separation and creation of nations at Babel. So Yah was going to use Abram and his seed to bring these people of the nations back to Yahweh. And an obedient people would be birthed from the rebellion of the nations. And that's why this is absolutely not about genetics, since the fulfillment of the covenant involves a remnant from all the nations returning to Yahweh. Yahweh even allowed this Canaanite woman Rahab to be the mother of kings. It was because of her heart, not because she was Jewish. And this is why some of this is just nonsense what we have going on nowadays. That followers of Yeshua should understand that this is not a genetic thing anymore. This is a matter of the heart, and the only blood that matters is the blood of Yeshua the Messiah that covers us and atones for our sins. While the elect that are mixed in the nations are under the gods of those nations, that's why Yahweh specifically judged the gods of Egypt through the 10 plagues, and at Jericho he was judging the chief god of the Canaanites as Yisrael entered into the promised land. Someday soon he'll be judging all the nations and all the gods of the nations, and we read about that in the text of Revelation. Well, did all the Israelites understand the spiritual battle that was taking place when they marched around Jericho, shouted and blew shofars? Maybe, maybe not. The important thing is that they obeyed the instructions. And I mentioned this before, and it's worth repeating. We are all on a need-to-know basis in the kingdom. Just as lieutenants, sergeants, corporals, and privates receive orders from their superiors, we are no different. The general does not need to explain his orders. He typically has far more intel than his subordinates, and he understands the battle much more than the underlings. And the power of the chain of command is when all the links obey the orders from on high. In this age of information, everyone is obsessed with knowing or speculating about just about everything, and it seems like everyone has an opinion. Ultimately, though, the only opinion that matters is Yahweh's opinion. The Israelites were successful at Jericho because they meticulously followed the instructions for taking down the walls of the city. They heeded the command of Joshua, who meticulously followed the directions that came from Yahweh. They didn't hear people who said, well, gee, I don't know, maybe we should make ladders, maybe we should make bulwarks, maybe we should make all sorts of devices that could knock down the walls. No, they just, and those might have seemed to make more sense, honestly, if you look at the history of warfare. But no, they followed Joshua's instructions, and Joshua meticulously handed down the instructions that he was given. Now consider what happened after the destruction of Jericho. Joshua sent a small band of warriors to capture Ai, but they ended up being routed. Well, Joshua was devastated. How could they have lost a battle? There had to be a problem. So Joshua fell down before Yahweh, and here is the response. Israel has sinned. They've transgressed my covenant that I commanded them. They've taken some of the devoted things. They've stolen and lied and put them among their own belongings. Therefore, the people of Israel cannot stand before their enemies. They turn their backs before their enemies because they have become devoted for destruction. I will be with you no more unless you destroy the devoted things from among you. Get up, consecrate the people, and say, consecrate yourselves for tomorrow, for thus says Yahweh Elohim of Israel, there are devoted things in your midst, O Israel. You cannot stand before your enemies until you take away the devoted things from among you. Well, remember the specific instructions immediately prior to the destruction of Jericho. It says, but you keep yourselves from the things devoted to destruction, lest when you've devoted them, you take any of the devoted things and make the camp of Israel a thing for destruction and bring trouble upon it. But all silver and gold and every vessel of bronze and iron are holy, or set apart to Yahweh. They shall go into the treasury of Yahuwah. Well, the people were told this right before they went in to destroy the city. And of course, the text previously told us, if you read Joshua 7 first, it told us the problem. It says, but people of Israel broke faith in regard to the devoted things, for Achan, the son of Carmi, son of Zabdi, son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, took some of the devoted things. And the Hebrew word harem is used to describe the devoted things. And, there's different translations translate harem differently. It could also be defined as accursed things or even doomed things. They were set apart for destruction. See, the metals could be refined by fire. You could take a golden idol or something, or jewelry, or something devoted to a god, and you could melt it down and reshape it. Everything else that could burn needed to be burned. They needed to be completely removed from the land so that the curse could be lifted and the land could be holy, kadosh, set apart. Well, imagine that. Yahweh knew that Achan was hiding harem from Jericho, but Joshua did not. They could discern that there was a problem because Yahweh was not fighting with them. They were not being blessed. And in order for Yahweh to dwell with his people need to remain set apart. And that's why Yahweh is not dwelling with the people who are currently living in the land and claiming the title of Israel. The people in the land are not set apart. The covenant land is completely defiled, just as it was in the days when Joshua was leading Israel into the land. Now, can you imagine that the debate in Israel over the past weeks was whether it was acceptable for army reservists to sodomize Palestinian prisoners? Even more disturbing is the fact that under Talmudic law, it's actually acceptable. While many Israeli citizens are horrified by what's happening in their nation, ultimately they need to heed the words that Joshua spoke to Achan. My son, I beg you, give glory or kavod to Yahweh, Elohim of Israel, and make confession to him, and tell me now what you have done. Do not hide it from me. They need to repent and confess, just as Achan later confessed. He says, truly I have sinned against Yahweh Elohim of Israel, and this is what I did. When I saw among the spoil a beautiful cloak from Shinar, and 200 shekels of silver, and a bar of gold weighing 50 shekels, then I coveted them and took them, and see, they're hidden in the earth inside my tent with the silver underneath. The people of Israel need to turn to the prince and follow him. They need to make confession to him and give honor, esteem, glory, kavod to Yahweh. And that's what we all need to do. And the rules of the battle are the same now as they were back then. Whenever we stray from the commands of Yahweh, we find ourselves getting into trouble. Achan lusted after the luxuries of Babylon and precious metals. The cloak from Shinar was a beautiful Babylonian outer garment. In the grand scheme of things, it must have seemed minuscule to Achan. What's the big deal? Especially this beautiful robe It was just going to be destroyed anyway. Why burn something so nice, so beautiful? Well, it was a big deal to Yahweh, whether Achan understood the significance or not. While he ultimately confessed his sin, that did not save him from judgment. He received the same punishment as Jericho, since he tried to cling to the accursed thing of Jericho. He and all his family ended up in a heap, just like Jericho ended up in a heap. Once the cursed harem was removed from the camp, Yahweh later led the Israelites into victory, and incredibly, the fighting men were allowed to take plunder from Ai, unlike Jericho, where all the plunder belonged to Yahweh. And this is an important distinction. Jericho was the first fruit of the land. That offering belonged to Yahweh. All the first fruits of the land belonged to Yahweh. The Israelites would later be allowed to take plunder after Yahweh received the first fruits. If only Achan had waited, he needed to wait upon Yahweh, and that's an important reminder for us all. There are conditions for the provision from Yahweh as well as the victory, and it's critical that we remain set apart and not mix with the world, and it's important that we follow orders. Last week we talked about the mezuzah and the significance of keeping our protected space set apart. Our tents, our apartments, our houses, our RVs, where we call home. Whatever space we've been given needs to be separate, set apart. Our space is our garden, and our mission is no different from that of Adam and Hawa. If you plant the seeds of Babylon in your garden, you're going to produce the fruits of Babylon. Well, it is fruit. It's not good fruit that Yahweh is looking for. It's bad fruit. Sometimes we don't understand the reason for certain commandments. Why can't we eat from the tree of all knowledge? It looks good and it tastes good. The world says it's good for us also. Well, that's where the deception takes root. When we start questioning the commandments and start loosening them to accommodate our desires, it's then that we start to stray off the straight and narrow. Did God really say that? Did God really mean that? Surely, Yahweh won't miss a little gold or silver from the offering. How can he possibly care about a piece of clothing from Shinar? Well, before you know it, you're no longer set apart. Your home is all filled with Babylon. You've ceded your territory to the enemy. Any sailor knows that a slight course change may seem harmless in the short term, but after the passage of time, that navigational error expands immensely. Instead of hitting the mark, you'll end up lost at sea or crashing into the rocks. Regular course correction and adjustment is important in order to stay on course. It's critical to frequently check the charts and see where you are headed. That's what the appointed times are for. They are buoys and markers that keep us on course as long as we observe them properly. The Sabbath is a perfect opportunity to examine our home. That is, after all, where you're supposed to be resting. It's not a bad idea to take an inventory and assess whether you're losing some skirmishes because you're repeating the sin of Achan. Just because we read about these things in the past doesn't mean we're immune from making the same mistakes in the present. And in fact, they're there for us to learn from, like the 10 times that Israel put Yahweh to the test. Those lessons are really there so that we understand the importance of trusting Yahweh and not complaining and not moaning and groaning, but waiting upon him for the provision and trusting that he will provide the provision. So all those tests that Israel experienced were for us as well. They were included in the Torah for our instruction, and we are not supposed to repeat those mistakes. If we don't take heed, we definitely can. And I grew up in Christianity thinking that the Old Testament was all just a bunch of interesting stories from the past. Those ridiculous Israelites, why didn't they just obey? Why were they so stiff-necked? I had the idea that since I was a Christian, I was somehow immunized from making those same mistakes. After all, I was already saved under grace. Grace was like a magical force field that protected me from all sin and judgment once I asked Jesus into my heart. I was told that I should not try to obey the commandments. If I did, that would be legalism. And instead of being under the force field of grace, I would be under the law, which was presented as a bad thing. Well, I was deceived. I was on the wide path of destruction, and I didn't even know it because I was surrounded by people who were also deceived. We were not set apart, and we all reinforced each other in our deceived condition. There's power in surrounding yourself with like-minded people, a like-minded community, but you'd better be sure that the Torah is in their minds. Well, I failed to understand that remaining set apart within the boundaries established by Yahuwah was what kept us safe. Well, being under the law of the Pharisees is bondage. Being under the protection of the Torah is life. And that's why James, whose real name was Yaakov, referred to the Torah as the perfect law of liberty. And King James correlated the precepts of Yahuwah to liberty. Well, thank Yahuwah that he's kind, patient, and merciful, but sometimes we lose a battle, and it's supposed to be a wake-up call. When Joshua and the Israelites started losing, they had to ask why. Well, Joshua was leading them in the flesh. The prince of the army of Yahuwah, who I believe was Yeshua, was not fighting for them in the spirit realm because they were mixed with Babylon. There was sin in the camp. Well, are you losing any battles and don't know why? Is there sin in your camp? Remember that the mezuzah is not a talisman or a magic charm. It doesn't ward off evil. It's a commandment that reminds us to observe the commandments, to stay set apart and keep evil out of our homes. You can have a mezuzah on every door of your home and even on your car. Yes, they do make mezuzahs for cars. That doesn't mean you can't invite Babylon in through your radio, the TV, or through images, objects, books, or even clothes, like Achan did. The Babylonian clothing that Achan kept in his tent could have just as easily been a Versace jacket adorned with the goddess Medusa. Do you catch my drift? It's not such an old story. It's actually very relevant to us nowadays. Of course, plenty of garments are adorned with the names and images of pagan entities in popular culture, including the goddess Nike, the Greek goddess of victory. She played a prominent role in the closing ceremonies of the Olympics in Paris. The statue called the Winged Victory of Samothrace is none other than a statue of the goddess Nike that was made as an offering to the gods on the Greek island of Samothrace. I remember I went to the Louvre many, many years ago, decades ago, and the Winged Victory, they would call it, was one of the highlights of the Louvre, and they gave it this special location. It's kind of interesting that at that time, I was not so much aware of the influence of pagan gods and goddesses in modern culture, and so they called it Winged Victory, and I had no idea it was Nike at the time. They didn't make that connection until later. And of course, Nike is depicted on Olympic medals because her association with victory, and the Olympics this year seemed to be a resurrection of their pagan origins, as I talked about. I think it was a couple weeks ago when I commented on some of the controversy involving the opening ceremonies that I saw. Well, I didn't look much at the closing ceremonies. I did see some commentary. Looked like they had just a bunch more pagan ideas and concepts. I saw something about the Golden Voyager and the revival. It looked like the whole theme was reviving the pagan origins, and that's why they had the ancient winged victory of Samothrace there. This ancient statue of Nike there, and apparently the whole object was we're going to revive the paganism from the past. Well, I wonder how many people allowed these pagan ceremonies into their homes through their televisions. Indeed, how many people invite Nike into their homes and wear the Babylonian attire adorned with her name? Speaking of Nike, did you know that a rapper named Lil Nas X sells modified Nike Satan sneakers that include a pentagram and a drop of human blood in the insole? I can assure you that those sneakers will ultimately lead the wearer to destruction, not to victory. And maybe it's time to take off our sandals or sneakers and step onto holy ground. Talk to the Prince of the Army of Yahuwah and listen to his instructions to experience true victory. If you fail to identify and purge Babylon from your life, you might keep losing battles. And eventually it's even possible to be on the wrong side of the battle. Remember the doctrine of Balaam that I mentioned last week? There's a very elaborate event described in Numbers 22 through 24 when the Moabite king Balak sought the assistance of Balaam. He wanted to achieve victory for the Moabites over the approaching Israelites by having Balaam curse Israel. And most people only remember the incident when Balaam's donkey spoke to him and the fact that Balaam ended up actually speaking blessings over Israel. Nevertheless, Israel did end up being plagued because of their involvement with the Moabites. And instead of fighting with them, the Moabites invited them to dinner and introduced them to their gods. Some of the Israelites joined themselves to Baal Peor by participating in their sacrifices, and those who died in the plague were 24,000. Well, Balaam ended up telling Balak a secret, that if he could get the children of Israel to stray from the commandments, then they would fall under a curse. And why go head to head with them when everyone else is losing? Let them defeat themselves. And that is made clear by Yeshua. You don't read that necessarily in Bamidbar in Numbers, but it's made clear by Yeshua himself in his message to the assembly of Pergamos. In Revelation 2:14 it says, "But I have a few things against you, because you have there those who hold to the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed to idols, and to commit sexual immorality." Well, if the enemy can get you to step outside the protection of the commandments and fall under the wrath of Elohim, that's a very effective strategy. He's been using it in religions for thousands of years. If he can just divert your attention away from Yahweh, then he can get you sick, dying, and eventually dead. Modern Christianity does not teach you to obey in order to experience health and blessings. It tells you to go to a faith healer. It tells you to name it and claim it and give more money to your favorite megachurch so God will bless you. It's a real mess, and it's about to get messier, as I expect the deception on earth to continue. Now, my primary mission is to warn Christians who claim to follow the Messiah. Many are being deceived, and the times are getting very serious. The text of Revelation warns of the approaching deception. In Revelation 13, starting in 11, we read, "Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. He performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast would both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. So there will be a beast that looks like a lamb, but speaks like a dragon. This beast will likely look great to Christians who lack discernment. They will see the signs and flock to this beast to participate in his revival tour. They'll readily receive the spirit that's operating through this beast that looks like a lamb. We've been warned against seeking signs. Yeshua said a wicked and adulterous generation seeks a sign. And we've also been warned to test the spirits. 1 John 4 beginning at 1, it says, Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits whether they are of Elohim, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. By this you know the spirit of Elohim. Every spirit that confesses that Yeshua, Messiah, has come in the flesh is of Elohim. And every spirit that does not confess that Yeshua, Messiah, has come in the flesh is not of Elohim. And this is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you have heard was coming, and is now already in the world. You are of Elohim, little children, and have overcome them, because he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. They are of the world, therefore they ask as of the world, and the world hears them. We are of Elohim. He who knows Elohim hears us. He who is not of Elohim does not hear us. By this we know the spirit of truth and the spirit of error. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of Elohim, and everyone who loves is born of Elohim and knows Elohim. He who does not love does not know Elohim, for Elohim is love. In this the love of Elohim was manifested toward us, that Elohim has sent his only begotten Son into the world, that we might live through him. In this is love, not that we loved Elohim, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be the propitiation for our sins. Beloved, if Elohim so loved us, we also ought to love one another. Sadly, instead of advancing the teachings of Yeshua to love Elohim and to love their neighbor, I see millions of evangelical Christians standing with and supporting an antichrist state that is opposed to both the Father and the Son. They're not testing and discerning the spirits. They are under the spell of the Nakash. Many of these same people are flocking to megachurches, chasing after signs. And there's actually a psychological phenomenon called fear of missing out, known as FOMO, that has become quite pervasive with the increase of information in social media. People get anxious and depressed if they think they're missing out on an investment, something fun and exciting, or a move of God. And that's why people will travel far and wide if they hear that revival is going on somewhere. They want to share in the experience. They want to feel the power, be in the center of the action, bask in the glory, you name it. It's not so much the message, it's the music, the miracles, the excitement, the entertainment. Well, many of those so-called revivals are simply emotional and experiential events that do not result in people obeying Yahweh. And the dragon is more than happy for these people to go chase after signs, go to lawless churches, and attend lawless revivals. He knows the rules of the battle. He knows the doctrine of Balaam. He's confident that we actually do fall under the wrath of Elohim when we disobey and embrace lawlessness. He actually believes the words of Yeshua, who stated, Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Even so, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Therefore, by their fruits you will know them. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Well, we're supposed to be examining fruit, and the enemy knows how to make bad fruit look and taste good. He just needs to get you to take a bite. He's fishing for souls using fruit. Well, we're supposed to be casting nets. His false prophets will even look like a lamb when they speak their lies, and that's why I'm not interested in flashy television personalities who are prophesying, casting out demons, or performing wonders. We've been warned that it's all part of the deception. Those individuals will all have to answer before Yeshua whether their actions bore the fruits of righteousness or lawlessness, as we all will. The group of many that Yeshua tells to depart from him are clearly Christians, or probably said a prayer and and asked Jesus into their hearts. They surely thought they were saved. Sadly, they were lawless. They did not obey the commandments. They were deceived by the doctrine of Balaam. So beware of the beast that's coming to deceive. Don't chase after signs. Cling to the tzitzit of Yeshua. An important key to our victory involves avoiding the deception of lawlessness. We can also fall under the wrath of Elohim when we align with those scheduled for punishment. Well, remember Jeremiah in Jerusalem. He warned the Yahudim not to fight Babylon. He warned them that it was the judgment of Elohim. He told them to surrender, not to stand with Zedekiah, the last king of Judah, whose birth name was Netanyahu, by the way. His Hebrew birth name means gift of Yahuwah and shares the same meaning with the name Netanyahu. Well, remember Yeshua in Jerusalem? He warned of impending judgment and destruction. He told his followers when and where to flee. He did not tell them to go to Jerusalem and stand with the defiant Yahudim who ended up getting slaughtered by the Romans. Yahuwah does not punish the righteous with the unrighteous, but the righteous need to get out of the way. A wise man, when evils are approaching, hides himself, but fools pass on and will be punished. It's interesting that psalm is quoted twice in Psalm 22:3 and 27:12. It's like two witnesses for us there. Well, the righteous are not perfect, but they walk perfect through obedience. If Lot decided he was not going to listen to the two witnesses sent by Yahuwah, he would have fallen under judgment. If he decided to stand with Sodom instead of fleeing, then he would have fallen with Sodom as well. He would have ended up as a pile of ashes and a pillar of salt, like his wife. This aligns with what I discussed last week. Sometimes the fight is not ours. We simply need to get out of the way. Sadly, I see people consumed with political fights and aligning with political parties that are all doomed, like the accursed things in Jericho. They flood social media platforms, hoping that if speech can just be uncensored, somehow that will save America and the rest of the world. People are shifting from one social media platform to the other, as if one is for censorship and the other is for free speech, and they don't realize that the same gang of technocrats runs them all. In fact, they're actually being herded like cattle and classified based upon their platform of choice. Their data is being collected, and they're continually being profiled through this AI information-driven beast system. I use the metaphor of cattle purposely because we are nothing more than livestock to the rulers of the world. They want to milk us dry and then slaughter us for consumption. And the choices you're being presented are often false choices. The heroes being offered to restore free speech and make America great are simply Trojan horses. They want to connect you to the beast one way or another so they can control you. Again, the dialectic provides the illusion of choice, and there are slight differences in the platforms and the candidates. In the end, though, they're all data mining operations looking to hijack your mind and control your family. And that's why it's important to understand the battle. And you don't always have to pick a side. We don't need Nike to give us the victory, and we don't need to select a hero to champion our cause. We already have one. If our cause is the kingdom of Yahuwah, our champion is Yeshua, the prince of Yahuwah's army. We simply need to give our kavod, our glory, our strength, everything we have to Yahuwah. We must stand on holy ground and worship him by obeying his instructions and staying set apart. When we choose his side and get behind Yeshua, he fights for us. All he asks in return is for us to express our love and appreciation through diligent obedience. That is the key to victory. My name is Todd Bennett from ShemaYisrael.net. Barakot and Shalom.